Good morning. I'm Shane Totten. I work here at Southface, and I have the honor of stewarding the resources and people who create, conceive, and implement our education, workforce development, and research. We're excited to have this conversation this morning. I'm going to try without this. Can y'all hear me? Yeah. We're excited to have this conversation. Can we move on from that one? We're excited to have this conversation this morning because it ties into our strategic plan. And if you didn't know it, we have a new strategic plan that will carry us through the next 4 years. And as someone who's seen a lot of strategic plans, I'm really excited about this one. It is bold, it is innovative, and it actually is something that we use every day versus creating it and then putting it on the shelf. And so one of our leading goals is to become the leading voice in the transition of the Southeast's economy to one that is regenerative. Regenerative economy. What is a regenerative economy? What is regenerative design? These are all fancy words used by fancy people, but they have very real meaning. And so I want to take a quick minute and we're going to level set these definitions so that we're all working from the same place this morning. And then as I define it, they're going to redefine it, and then we can discuss that at the end. But what we have done since the Industrial Revolution, so mid-1800s, we have had a linear economy or an extractive economy. What that means is we take stuff out of the ground, we make things with it, we use them, and then we throw it in a hole in the ground. See any flaws with that idea? There is a recycling economy, or sustainability as we call it. We take things out of the ground, we use them. Some of the things that we use, we actually can repurpose them and use them again, like aluminum is a great example. But the problem is, we still put a lot of stuff in the ground. So we are working with the ideas of infinite economies or infinite resources when we all know that we live on a planet that is bound by quite a few laws that we just can't break. We're acting like we can, but we can't. So, a circular economy is one where it's a closed system, and you put resources into it, material flow, and then you use them, and then you reuse them, and then you reuse them, and then you reuse them. Problem with this is that it's a closed system. It has limited capacity. Fortunately, there's minimal loss into the landfill, so we've eliminated that problem. Problem is that we keep populating the planet. So regenerative economy takes the idea of the circular economy and it creates, you like that? That's kind of cool. It creates capacity over time. So a great example of this is the planet on which we sit. When it was first created, it was hot, molten rock with nothing else. And today, 3.8 billion years later, there are millions and millions of species of life on this planet. Because the planet, over time, which is a closed system, has worked in dynamic balance. And as it's in balance, it keeps growing in its capacity to support life. Now, there have been a couple of resets. We call those mass extinctions. We might be in one at the moment called the 6th mass extinction, but life has created the capacity for life. So regenerative design and regenerative economy are basically ones that keep creating greater capacity based on the inputs. Now, how does Southface play into that? Well, we have a built environment, and the built environment is the thing in which we all experience our lives. So, looking at the idea that Southface in its work focus on the built environment, remember we support sustainable homes, workplaces, and communities, we want to see in the Southeast and the globe itself an economy that generates thriving natural systems, shared prosperity, and an improved quality of life. And so our work over the next 4 years is going to double down and focus on achieving those outcomes. You will hear about the regenerative economy from us until it becomes part of your daily vocabulary. And we're excited about that because it's really necessary. So we're going to look at regenerative design today from a couple of different perspectives. And you guys want to come over and sit down here. I feel like we should have a lineup photograph. We're going to talk about regenerative design from a couple of different perspectives. And so to do that, we've got some great speakers this morning. I'm going to introduce them. First, Casamassima is principal and founder of Interweave People Place and a board member of the Sustainable Design Collaborative of Atlanta. She's an interior design professional with expertise in workplace strategy, biophilic design, sustainability, and research-driven environments. She's an adjunct at SCAD Atlanta, and she holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in interior design from Tennessee and a Master of Fine Arts in interior design from SCAD. And I might have taught her when she was at SCAD. So it makes my heart big and happy to see her up here, an expert in everything. Shannon Goodman is the Executive Director of the Lifecycle Building Center since 2012. Before that, she spent 13 years working as an architect, including 5 at Perkins-Will, where she coordinated a large-scale salvage effort from which 62 tons of building materials were reclaimed and donated to 19 organizations. This project led to her involvement in co-founding the Lifecycle Building Center. She holds a bachelor's degree from Ohio State and a master's degree from Georgia Tech. Keith Lutz is a project manager and works in sales for Raydeo Enterprises. With 30 years of experience in the commercial materials fabrication and customization industry, Keith has carved out a reputation of being the go-to guy for hospitality, multifamily amenities, and signage projects. A gifted artist in his own right, Keith admires architectural projects with a creative flair and has a keen eye for aesthetic elements. Some of his major work includes work for the Fern Bank, U on the Park, Carter's headquarters, and most recently, the Candida Building for innovative sustainable design. Stanton Stafford is mechanical engineer and managing principal of Integral Consulting Engineering in Atlanta. And it's the Atlanta office of the Integral Group, which is an international group. Stanton brings 20 years of experience designing, modeling, commissioning mechanical systems for a variety of building types. Nationally, he's helping promote healthy, resilient, low-energy, low-water use buildings as chair of ASHRAE's Technical Committee 2.8, Building Environmental Impacts and Sustainability. ASHRAE never really has like things that flow off their tongue, do they? You can tell engineers are naming those things. He's also secretary of ASHRAE Standard 228, standard method of evaluating zero net energy building performance. Again, I rest my case on ASHRAE. Locally, he serves as pastor and advisory member of the Lifecycle Building Center. He's also a charter member of the University of Georgia's Mechanical Engineering Advisory Board and working group co-chair on the Greenville Atlanta Host Committee. And I'm his co-chair on that. So without further ado, we are going to hand it over to Bonnie.
Good morning. How's everybody doing? Okay. Everybody got their coffee? Good. Wonderful. Well, my name is Bonnie Casamassima. It's an honor to be here with you all today. I'm going to be sharing a conversation about Sustainable Design Collaborative Atlanta, an organization that I've been on the board for about 6 years now. And by way of introduction about me, so you've heard the bio, the introduction. I am an adjunct professor at SCAD as well, but there will not be a spelling test on my last name, I promise you. I'm a former Southfacer as well. I'm really honored to wear that hat. To introduce the context of this, Interweave People Place is the consulting firm that I started, where we're really looking at regenerative design from the lens of interior architecture and interior design and the science behind how we're designing our spaces to help people be better when they leave the building than before they came in. So we're really looking at it from the lens of regeneration of people and that aspect of it. We use the science of environmental psychology as well as biophilic design, and we partner with design firms to bring that expertise to the conversation. I'm able to bring this conversation and honored to do so as a board member with Sustainable Design Collaborative, which is what today's conversation will be focused on, to really bring it at a broader lens of what regenerative design can look like. So for those that haven't worked with Sustainable Design Collaborative, who are we? Okay. We are an all-volunteer organization made up of designers, architects, those in the construction industry, engineers, landscape architects, really everybody that runs the gamut within sustainability. And what we do is we come together once a year and volunteer our time on the weekends, oftentimes in late nights, because we all know we're working 90 hours a week outside of that. And we work with one nonprofit a year to create a very inclusive, through participatory process, project deliverable, where we're looking at the organization, and basically at the end, we're creating a set of schematic design plans. Looking at a series of charrettes, looking at a series of conversations with the organization. That organization can then take this visual package. I brought a book example. We'll talk about in a second. Literally, the deliverable is a book that organizations then can take to fundraisers to get the project implemented funded. Right? So that's the piece that we work with. Again, all volunteer. It's a very big piece of the pie, but a very small piece of that overall process.
Sure, yeah. All right, can you hear me now? Perfect. So now that you've heard a little bit about what Sustainable Design Collaborative is and what we do, we want to highlight some of our past projects and partners. Ooh, that's loud. Can you hear me okay in the back? Okay. So we were honored to get to partner in testing 1, 2. I feel like I'm at a concert right now. All right. Perfect. So in 2013, we were honored to get to partner with Lifecycle Building Center doing this very process. It's wonderful that it always comes full circle and getting to be on the panel again today with those same partners. Another example of how we're pulling regenerative design into this holistic conversation. And this is a visioning conversation, right? So we're setting the tone at a very macro level with this. Is we're looking at existing buildings and the structure, and we're pulling the science and the psychology of how our environments impact people into that schematic design visioning, right? So for example, a recent project we worked with was Solomon's Temple, which is a center for children and women that are going through homelessness. So we looked at the existing building, looked at the existing architecture, and tried to identify very low-cost solutions where we can use the psychology of color, for example, to help create a sense of energy, a sense of well-being, a sense of place, right? We also looked at the way that we're organizing the different floors around that to create neighborhoods within that floor. So we're looking at the existing building, and a can of white paint is the same cost as a can of green paint, it's the same cost as a can of orange paint, right? So we're looking at the science, being very intentional about strategic solutions that are low cost, and doing it in such a way where we're creating a sense of neighborhood, so there's a sense of belonging for those that are there while they're there, to make it as the least amount of stressful as possible while they're going through this very traumatic time. Right? The final project that I'll highlight within Sustainable Design Collaborative, it's an honor to get to partner this year with Greenville and USGBC Georgia, where we looked at SDCA's existing process. High level, we go through an RFP each year where we'll say, hey, we're looking for calls for entry. You're a nonprofit, let's see if this is a support that can support you. We go through a formal interview process, and then we land on that final project. So we were able to use that same process, partnering with USGBC Georgia this year to identify what that legacy project would be. We were honored to have 11 applicants in that RFP process for the legacy project at Greenville. And what this is Greenville is, as many of us know, this really wonderful conference that's coming November 19th through 22nd. So if you've not registered yet, go ahead and register. And what they do is they earmark $10,000 from that conference each year and dedicate it to the implementation of a project in that community so that the legacy of Greenville lives on far beyond the conference itself. So we partnered with USGBC Georgia to go through the process, and the final recipient was Hagar. They are an organization in Vine City that looks at identifying houses that are underutilized and how can they be redesigned in such a way to keep the people in that area in that space in a healthy, sustainable way and minimize displacement as that area changes. It was actually a project that SDCA worked on in 2016 where we looked at their existing building, was on the left, and we worked through sustainable strategies on the interior, exterior, landscaping, all of it. And this is what it looks like about 2 months ago, right? So they were able to implement it, they implemented building envelope, a lot of strategies around reducing the use of our utilities and electricity. So Hagar proposed to take that one step further for the legacy project. And they looked at how can we actually start to generate electricity from this process. So what the proposal was is let's get solar panels on this energy optimized building so we can help to further cut the utility costs for the building participants in there. It's worth noting, we're talking about regeneration, that this project itself has already spurred the revitalization of a number of other projects in the area to lead more sustainable practices with their renovations, even before the solar panels were a conversation with it. What it's also doing is identifying partners in the community, so Booker T. Washington High School. We're targeting a few students in that school to actually help with the installation of those solar panels to help with energizing workforce development around sustainability with it. So it's looking at this one project, regeneration as a broader term, looking at design, how it can really support our health and our well-being. But how can the project itself also create this ripple effect through those partnerships and through that integrative process to help create change that truly is regenerative beyond just the project itself. So it's a little bit about SDCA. Here's a little bit about how we can get involved. We are always looking for volunteers. Would love to talk with you. There'll be a sign-up sheet in the front. I think I have 1 minute left. I did want to turn it over to Suzanne. I'm talking about the Legacy Project.
Yeah, we're really excited with the Legacy Project, and if anybody wants to get involved in the community, there will be a Festival of Lights on October the 12th. So talking about the solar project and giving you a chance to get engaged with the community. So yeah.
Thank you. I also wanted to give a shout out to Cherry Street with their partnership on this project as well, with helping that solar panel actually be a viable solution with it. So again, my name is Monica Casamassima. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
All right, next up is Shannon with Lifecycle.
Good morning. Thank you for coming out today to be a part of this exciting conversation. A few of you may be familiar with what we do, but some may not, so I want to make sure that you are. This is a shot of our facility down in southwest Atlanta. And what LBC is essentially a nonprofit that looks at maximizing resource efficiency in the built environment. I think I may have, I feel like this is scrolling through. Hang on, maybe I just hit that without meaning to. It must be very sensitive. So we look at communities and we look at how the built environment can actually be supportive to the natural environment instead of having detrimental effects. And our mission is to create more resilient communities through that process. I swear I didn't even touch it that time, but okay. When you look historically, we've been in operation for about 8 years, and we've had a fairly sizable impact. We've been able to keep 5 million pounds of usable building materials from unnecessarily going into landfills. And we have a couple programs going to go into more detail about. One of those is an opportunity for nonprofit schools, houses of faith, to apply for building material grants. So obviously this is a part of this conversation about how can we look holistically at creating more resilient and more regenerative communities. And then finally, there's a lot of economic benefit to what we do through building material reuse. So we've had a tremendous impact in terms of cost savings. All of the nonprofits that have received free materials, as well as the general public that comes to that facility that you saw on the first slide, they come and are able to purchase salvaged materials for up to 85% off of retail prices, sometimes even higher than that. And so this is almost $3 million in community savings. A few examples of the programs that we provide. First and foremost is the process of removing these materials. And there's something that I'm going to touch upon later with this in terms of job creation. There's a lot of opportunity in workforce development in deconstruction. So if those of you who aren't familiar with what deconstruction is, it's basically construction in reverse. And forgive me, Polly, for saying this, but Polly Sattler was one of our first volunteers that has been out on a deconstruction project with those of us that created LBC, and she knows what I'm talking about. So this is literally figuring out how was this stuff put in and constructed, and how can we reverse that process. This is a shot of a typical kitchen, so you can see all the cabinets that have been removed. When you come to our reuse center, this is obviously the section of doors. So we've got a huge variety of materials. So we're talking about cabinets, doors, flooring material, lighting, plumbing fixtures, on and on, architectural pieces, etc. And all of this stuff would have been thrown away. We also do some programs in education. This is a shot of one of my favorite events. We go down every year for Raydeo in Serenbe, and we do these projects where we take salvage materials and our staff all goes down and we teach children how to build something useful out of these materials. So this is a shot of building bird houses and bat houses. We will be down there again this year, so I highly recommend coming down. And we also have another educational program called our Home Performance Workshop. And Erin Gallagher from our staff, who introduced herself earlier, has actually, if you don't mind, I want to share with everybody that Erin has just been promoted. She's our new programs and outreach manager. So she's your go-to person to get information about these programs. And we have a class coming up on September 14th, which is a Saturday. And you can see one of our board members, Joe Thomas, is right here. He teaches our home performance classes, and these are basically a 3-hour class where homeowners can learn how they can save costs in their home. So how can they save energy? How can they also avoid issues with indoor air quality from mold and moisture? And then our nonprofit match program, I want to highlight a few examples of that. This is a shot from the East Side Beltline Visitor Center. And what's cool about it is that all of the wood that you see, which was done beautifully by Weekly Construction, this was all reclaimed from Pond City Market. So you've literally got a space that the public is coming into and has an opportunity to have this experience of seeing something that's been saved from the landfill, turned into something beautiful. So it's a great education opportunity for the community. And it's also a way that this organization, the Atlanta Beltline Partnership, was able to save a lot of cost on their project. So it's a great story, and it's literally been salvaged from a historic building just down the Beltline. You can't beat that, right? Another great story that really speaks to the circular economy and regenerative communities is at Friends of Refugees, which is another SDCA client. This shot on the left is a structure that they created for their community garden in Clarkston. So they've literally got over 70 refugee families that are growing food out of this space. And we were able to give them materials through the match program from TV and film sets. You can see reclaimed doors here. You can see panels around the entire structure. So again, significantly reducing their costs, helping them support refugee families to have a sustainable food supply. And I'm going to move a little faster, sorry, Kelsey. Another story near us is Beltline Bikes. What's cool about this, as well as Friends of Refugees, is that we're literally working with this project teams to think through what are all the opportunities to incorporate reclaimed building materials into their projects. And as they're going through capital campaigns, how can we tell that story of the financial savings and then obviously the environmental benefits? And this is a shot that shows, this is LBC, this is the Beltline, that's Bearings Bike right there. This is the Luma Farm, great story. I think Stanton Integral had some involvement in this, is that correct?
You'll see this slide.
Okay, sorry. But another great story off the grid, LBC was able to provide reclaimed cypress paneling from a couple of different residential deconstruction projects that we did. And I'll let Stanton tell the story. But more materials that we were able, all the 2x4s for all their seed growing trays, a lot of plumbing fixtures, compost bins, lots of stuff. Just gonna scroll through a couple of these. This is another project down the Beltline at Golden Kombucha, the Lee and White facility. And then I have to touch briefly, even though I know Keith is going to talk about this more, on the living building, the Cadita building from Innovative Sustainable Design. If you aren't aware, there are a lot of materials that were reclaimed from sites across Atlanta. And I have to at least just make this one comment, and I know I saw Alyssa Kingsley from Lord X Sergeant in here somewhere earlier. But I just want to at least acknowledge that the project team for the Cadita building really took a hard look at a different way of thinking about how to source materials as they were creating the design. So we were literally having conversations at the beginning stages and thinking about what if the palette for designing this building is more than just coming out of a binder in a spec library, right? How can we look at buildings that are slated for removal in our own city and identify opportunities to source materials from those projects? It's incredibly exciting, and Kelsey's telling me I need to wrap it up. So this is a picture of a typical TV and film set. We were able to reclaim 2x4s that were then stored at Georgia Tech and later incorporated into the decking panels underneath the upper floor and at the roof. And I'm sorry for the shameless plug, but I'm not the first something to do this. If you'd like to learn more about all these material reuse stories, you can come to Lifecycle Building Center's fundraiser on October 17th, which will be held in this space. It's going to be a lot of fun, so I hope you can join us. And then last but not least, I did want to touch base on that workforce development piece. We have recently launched a pilot program with a national organization called Build Reuse. And the purpose of this is basically to figure out how can we integrate more deeply deconstruction and reuse into the city of Atlanta by convening the stakeholders that impact end-of-life decisions for the built environment. So this was our kickoff at City Hall earlier this year. And if you'd like to get involved, please let me know. My contact information is on the website. It's shannon@lifecyclebuildingcenter.org. I'd love to get you involved because this last piece that I want to share is that we're starting to work with agencies like the Atlanta Land Trust, the Land Bank Authority, and we're looking at blighted properties across the city and putting together deconstruction training programs so that we can help folks that have had difficulty creating sustainable career paths, and we can look at disassembling some of these structures and reclaiming those materials and simultaneously helping these organizations like ALT and the Land Bank rehab more houses faster with less cost because they're using reclaimed materials to do the rehab. And we have an affordability housing issue, obviously, in Atlanta. So you can see how all this ties together. And that's it. Thanks.
Next up is Keith. This is very sensitive. I hear that.
Thank you very much for having me here this morning. Great working on the project. We worked with Stanton Stafford and Deconstruction on the Canada building. We are a manufacturer of interior millwork, exterior projects, interior projects. We do rails, we do all sorts of stuff. We are basically the tool at the end of the rainbow that you guys consult on, design, as far as regenerative goes. You know, we're here to implement what you guys are pushing out there. It's great to see this. Nice to be a part of it because I feel like a newbie to the process. My goal over the last 30 years has been to take the drawing that an architect or designer does, figure out how to fit it into space that the construction guys build, and then put it in. So Canada building, being the living building challenge that it was, was great because it's a new process for us. So we're typically out there trying to source those materials from just straight vendors. We have suppliers that we use all the time, from metal to wood or anything else. But recently, the last few years, we've been doing lead projects for a while, but FSC projects are starting to come on the scene more and more. So it's nice to put all that together finally. So hopefully the trend continues that way. I mean, it looks like it is. So that's us. So I mean, we're out there in the trenches doing the things that you guys want us to do. So keep up the good work. Love it. Let's talk about the Canada. The thing, I had tried to get some of the some photos of it earlier, and I know that the construction guys are going to have a lot more photos that you guys will be able to access. But this, I believe, is, I know it's the site. So these trees right here, there's a laser. These trees are featured inside the building right now. The site was cleared, and Lord Aiken Sargent and Georgia Tech, other committees started stockpiling the materials that were going to be used inside the building. You were a part of that. So I'm really on the very end of this process for this building just over the last 8 to 9 months. But we've used materials out of, I believe, this is the church right here. Which aren't fun, it's some photos, but on the bottom right here, this was the church that a lot of the wood came out of. There's a warehouse over in Atlanta called the Brunel Warehouse that's full of great fixtures and maybe, things that you might be interested in. The Tech Tower, of course, had a renovation to an exterior stair not too long ago. So a lot of the wood that was taken out of that, 100-year-old yellow pine timbers, beautiful wood. And I'm glad that everybody had the forethought to save it because it turned into some really nice product for the project. This is one of them right now. We took the timber and they're stacks of timbers from the warehouse. We went down and hand selected these with Lord Aiken Sargent and of course, the guys from Skanska, and they gave us access to it, and we picked out the woods that would eventually become the treads for the monumental stair and the basement stair. So, interesting process. When you're taking the recycled woods, which some of you may know, that wood's been hammered into and nailed into for 100 years. Lots of different whatever the life cycle of this piece of wood was. This tree probably is 200 years old. So it's been in the tower since the 1880s. They took it out, warehoused it. So what we had to do to start with, and this is atypical for us, we had to buy a metal detector and start looking for nails. So every single board that was going into, from the church wood on the walls or anything else, was very much examined every step of the way because we have a router, half the size of this room, that we use to surface the material and make it usable for treads because you have very specific tolerances for stair treads, just code-related issues. So we had to take these rough timbers, surface them, get them prepared for the stairs, and then route them down. So we're out looking for nails in those too. The bits cost hundreds of dollars a piece. So anyway, that's the stair treads. Interesting stairs here. We had to basically go down and get pallet after pallet after pallet of these offcuts. This wood was from another construction project. I'm not really sure which one it was. It may have been the building itself, but they saved all of the offcuts. Pieces of wood about yay big, thousands, literally thousands of them. So we took those, planed them down, and glued them together over a structure that we built to fit the concrete level changes there, and made these awesome steps. This wood was interesting. This came from the church. Let's go back. The church that I showed you earlier was demolished, and it 2 minutes. Okay. It was the roof support, like boards like these. It would support the ceiling of, the waterproof, keep the ceiling up. These boards were taken down, and they started out as some of the worst boards in the warehouse, and we all just turn our noses up. But they ended up being some of the most beautiful. Let's get forward to some of those. Some of the most beautiful wood in the building, in my opinion. It just finished out nicely. Back to here. This was part of the process. We took the trees that were cut down. They had been cut to some basic shapes just for drying. Went into the warehouse, and we got them, took them back to our shop, started sawing them down to analyze them, get the shapes, and make sure that they fit the bill for all the counters, and transform them into these nice counters here. These are, I think they were black oak, white oak, water oak, the trees that were reclaimed. And these all, they all came from the site, which was great. Instead of going into a landfill, straight to the dump site. The process to get them there takes a lot of time. You all hear me okay? So good, all right. It takes a lot of time to go through the process, which we had to find some alternate ways to get them to here. We had to have them kiln dry, which could have taken 2 or 3 months just to get them to it after we took the possession of it. We found a kiln dryer down in South Georgia that was able to do it in like 25% of the time. There's other wood that's still coming that had to be found, and luckily for the people in South Georgia, there was a tornado that went through in March, and we were able to find through our kiln guy and source this wood, which had to have provenance. It had to be salvaged wood. We couldn't just come up with some wood that we found. We actually had videotape of these trees getting knocked down in the tornado, took them back. They're in the kiln right now being dried. So I'll wrap up. I'm sort of rambling on here a little bit, but I appreciate you guys having me. If you have questions, we'll follow up later. Great working with you guys. And I'm thinking that we've been working together the whole time. I'm just now sort of putting it all together. Anyway, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
Next up is Stanton.
Still sensitive, very good. So I'm Stanton Stafford.
If you have any questions, you've got a index card on your table and a pen, hopefully. You write the question and send it to the end of the table, and we'll come back to it.
So I'm Stanton Stafford with Integral Consulting Engineering. We're part of Integral Group, international consulting engineering firm focused on low carbon, healthy, sustainable buildings and communities and driving that globally. We're also the North American leaders in zero net energy building design and living building challenge projects, which kind of brings me to the topic at hand and why is this relevant for regenerative buildings. Well, part of a regenerative building is the ability to self-sustain from an energy perspective and produce more than it consumes on an annual basis. So I thought I'd bring this topic locally and kind of talk to where we stand within hot, humid climates. So barriers of entry, why we're not seeing a lot of these types of buildings. get into some barriers of entry first, which is energy codes. The strongest energy codes in North America and the United States are West Coast and in the Northeast. And we have less stringent codes, so people have a tendency to do minimal code compliance, so it's not really driving it from a code perspective. We do have new codes coming online next year, which will up the ante, but we're still behind the country in terms of stringent codes. Second, the average electricity prices are still relatively low within the Southeast, where we have hot and humid climates. The climate zones, this is the distribution. This is all from the New Building Institute's study on zero net energy buildings. We're in climate zone 3A. The climate zones with the most zero net energy projects are typically West Coast, different types of climates, and why is that? So kind of guide you through the impact of humidity, just kind of lay that on the table. So this is a chart of kind of the balance of humidity that acceptable humidity ranges you want in a building to promote thermal comfort. Why is humidity control important? It really ties to our ability to be thermally comfortable in a space. So without active humidity control in the building, within a high humid climate, these are graphs of a couple different HVAC system types and where you kind of end up. So we're above the acceptable range of humidity for thermal comfort. With humidity control, we get into those ranges, and what this really means is the energy impact to bring those buildings into good humidity control. So without humidity control, using two different system approaches, we have lower levels of energy consumption. Introducing active humidity control, this is just an example, you can see that there's a big jump in the energy consumption associated with humidity control. So this is driving, this is a barrier to really pushing for zero net energy buildings in high humid climates. Additionally, we still have a very linear approach to project delivery and really project costing, which is driving a lot of these aggressive strategies out of consideration. We're still thinking in terms of buckets as opposed to other methods of holistic thinking relative to project costing and decision making. But we are making some headway. Everybody is aware of the Candida building at Georgia Tech and all the great things that doing there, but there are other examples in your backyard in the Southeast where we are pushing zero net energy buildings. This is the building that Shannon showed earlier, the Beltline barn. A lot of people in this room had played a part in this. Lord Sergeant, Stephanie, when she was with the city, played a big part in this project. It's off-grid, doing some very cool stuff to show that it can be done. It's a retail store that we did in Dallas, Texas, using all off-the-shelf equipment. Very cost-effective model for driving zero energy with a different building typology. This is the Gulf State Park Interpretive Center in southern Alabama. There's the first, should be the first living building, certified living building in the Southeast. It's currently well into its certification breeding period. I was just down there a couple weeks ago. It's a really cool space. And this is an image that didn't translate very well, but Astra's new headquarters, example of a retrofit project, taking a underwhelming 1970s building and doing some cost-effective moves to bring it to zero energy. So how are we getting to these tougher goals and how are we driving zero energy into these projects? So it really starts with integrated teaming. I know in this room understand that, but getting everybody aligned with respect to goals, costs, how we're going to make decisions on a project is very critical to successfully driving zero energy and low carbon buildings. Focus on passive design before you really, it's very sensitive. Focus on passive design before you introduce active strategies, really driving what you can do with daylighting, shading, envelope, and then with that in mind, transferring the cost of your building from active systems to passive systems. Put your money, put your investment into passive systems. And then we're seeing more and more West Coast and East Coast that you can deliver these low energy, low carbon, zero energy, zero carbon buildings at a market rate. Additionally, thinking about simplicity when it comes to systems, as opposed to overcomplicating the equation. Go simple, go off the shelf. This introduces rough mobility. More people can install it, more people understand these systems, and it's helping to drive a lot of adoption and energy behind this building type. Additionally, adaptive and tunable comfort, really establishing what is thermal comfort and using different tools, different strategies to introduce comfort, not focusing on temperature, focusing on comfort, focusing on layering of spaces. And then finally, really establishing that path to net zero, starting with, maximizing, what you can put on the roof, really integrating it to the building, putting it on the building versus the site makes it more replicable. And then setting your budget, not forgetting that, we need to consume energy to do a lot of things in buildings, so, allocate budgets, plug loads, and then really work from there to iterate, how to work with the active systems to achieve your goals. I can talk about this for hours, but I have 8 minutes, so thank you very much.
So I'm going to ask the first question, and I'm going to ask Bonnie if this thing's cursed is what. Don't make me up there. Right. So we've talked about buildings and materials, and we've talked about how some of these buildings serve people. But Bonnie, could you briefly talk about the idea around design strategies or theories that allow us to create buildings that actually are regenerative for people?
Yeah, great question.
All right, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So I think an important piece of that conversation is making sure that you really start the process getting as many of the collaborators at the table as possible in that initial conversation. So getting, if possible, getting the contractor on board, getting the design firm, getting the landscape architect, everybody there to identify what those common goals are and identify those opportunities on the front end. It helps to streamline the process and actually can reduce the cost on the long term. So one piece. Looking at specific theories and research around how we're making sure we're designing spaces to help people to be healthier when they leave the building than when they arrived. We're looking at things such as biophilic design. So we're looking at the science of how we feel in our natural environments, and we're pulling that research into our building patterns. There are over 87 attributes of how we do that are scientifically linked. So that's one way it gives us that roadmap, so to speak. Another way is we're really looking at the products that we're bringing into our buildings to make sure that they are minimizing those chemicals that we're bringing in the first place. And ideally, they're actually working to our advantage where they have technology to actually improve that air quality when we pull it in. So things such as gypsum board, for example, that actually start to absorb some of those chemicals that are in our products. So we're looking at a macro level around the research and science, around space such as daylight, views, natural elements, and then we're looking a little more tangibly around those materials that we're bringing in to make sure that they're really improving the health as well as that airflow in our spaces.
And as a reminder, if you do have a question, just write it on the note card and just hold it up, and a Southface staffer will come grab it.
Stanton, you ready for your challenge? You showed a map with high humidity zones. Are climate zones moving? Will we need to change equipment on existing buildings as a reaction to climate change?
I would argue that we are seeing, changes in microclimates in, most of, the areas where we're designing buildings. The way we approach system sizing and building design is not looking at current or outdated weather files, but really looking at future forecasting files and really trying to zero in on the microclimate. Microclimate, is really the conditions at your site versus the conditions, at a representative, weather location. So, trying to build in that capacity, and or being thoughtful about trying to improve the microclimates so these systems that we install can operate more efficiently and be more resilient to increases in kind of the ambient, outdoor conditions around our projects.
Could you briefly elaborate on the difference between active system and passive system?
So, yeah, so a passive system, operates without, to put it simply, without the need for, electricity or an energy input. So think about it as, you're building walls, your roof, the glazing, the windows. So a lot related to the envelope and active system within a building, lighting, HVAC, anything that really needs that electrical input, power or energy input.
And I think each of you may have a bit of a response to this. So why don't we just start with Bonnie and we can kind of work our way down. It's great to see so many examples of workforce development, community engagement. How do you see social sustainability measures growing in Atlanta and nationally? And I would frame this question more directly into regenerative design and things that we're seeing, the elements of regenerative design and regenerative economies supporting social sustainability.
I keep trying to get out of it, but they keep handing it to me. I think we saw a lot of that in today's conversation. One of the biggest things is we are partnering with each other. So we're looking at what our resources are, often as nonprofits or as volunteer organizations, and how can we collaborate to really improve that impact through that collaboration overlap, and starting to identify partners within the community, such as with Hagar and Booker T. Washington High School, with how we're looking at specifically workforce development and potentially longer-term strategies. How can we work that into the curriculum within that school so it continues to move forward?
Thanks. So I know I touched on this a little bit, but for us, it's really taking advantage of these end-of-life decisions in the built environment and figuring out how can we create sustainable employment opportunities. I did want to also just say that, there's some incredibly exciting work being done. I'm sure folks, I know there was a mention of Paul Hawken and the Visionary Dinner, but the drawdown, Project Drawdown, and how that's being translated into Georgia. And, we're looking at, issues of equity and how through Georgia Drawdown we can demonstrate positive community benefits through workforce development, through material reclamation, and training programs, and spread that.
I think the biggest thing that helps us and helps with the sustainability of the resources is the Forestry Stewardship Council. We are a member of FSC. We're a certified member, which means that we are allowed to receive this wood and in the chain of custody, take it from a sustainable and responsibly grown forest all the way through the manufacturing process to, like, say, the sheet goods that go on the tables or solid wood trim around baseboards and windows and anything else. We are in that chain of custody so that we make sure that we're not buying too much and throwing stuff away. And it goes into the building, and that is, I mean, I think we've done maybe 2 or 3 FSC projects in town, and it's becoming a more and more stringent part of LEED. I mean, the buildings get LEED credit for it, but I mean, at the end of the day, the biggest thing is you're not just, taking wood that's being chopped down from a non-managed area where they're not replanting or really controlling that. So, and then just in the shop itself, trying not to have too much waste. It's all about the purchasing and receiving and processing and just keeping that chain of custody so that, that's our little bit of, that's our way of helping. That's really our best way at this point.
So Integral is focused on issues relative to social equity. Across the firm, one of the things that, I really enjoy about the company is, the transparency relative to sustainability reporting and really kind of understanding our metrics, and even when they're bad, disclosing those, to the public, and then working to improve on every aspect of the business relative to multiple areas of kind of social equity, responsibility, hiring, salaries, just kind of across the board.
Keith, as sort of the panelist with the most expertise in manufacturing, can you speak to some of the major hurdles that you encountered working on the Candida building relative to sort of maintaining the pricing control and process efficiency? So if we're creating things and we're trying to do that within a regenerative economy, within a closed loop system, I believe there should have been some sort of hurdles because our economy is not really set up to do that right now. So what were some of the major impediments that you saw trying to meet the owner's project requirements around these materials and these products?
Well, it was a little different from us because, for one, we have vendors that we can go, hey, we need a pallet of 4x8, 3/4 inch plywood with this core that needs a LEED requirement or whatever it does, depending on the requirements of the specifications. In this case, we got handed stacks and stacks and stacks of wood that needed to be something else. So it took a little creative design. I would watch our engineers out there, with a forklift, lifting logs up, going, hey, this counter has to be this big and it has to be that. And, you got a run of 3 or 4 counters that make a 20, 30 foot long counter that is a tree. And I mean, it has a live edge on the bottom. So, I mean, just for us, it's not about the math of just joining it. It was a little bit of an art, we go out. I mean, we had at one point from one table, we would, get the logs cut, and I would get them to stand them up and take pictures and then put those into a drawing program so I could move the logs around and do this just to find how the grains work. We've done that on a few projects, but in this, it's, it was a requirement, had to do it. And it's not something that your average shop got, even we have a few guys that are like really super high level craftsmen and they go down like anywhere. It's, we're up in the Canton Ball Ground area. We're not down here. We're not attracting the top talent of the region because it's just far out. So being able to do that and have to sit down and make everybody think about it a little bit harder than just chop this piece of wood up and make a cabinet. We have programs that'll draw a cabinet, tell it we need drawers and doors, it has to be this big. It'll spit out math, but in this case, not so much. That was a pretty good challenge. Long 2x4s that had to become milled down to become honeycomb flooring that went down a ramp, had an angle, and there's a lot of intersecting angles there that the guys are not entirely used to. So. We're sort of known for the custom stuff when something is too hard for somebody else. All right, we'll figure it out. It was a challenge, but I think we got through it okay. But I mean, the building on the finishes, the wood, the things that we would scoff at, I think turned out the best. What's the wood here? It's good.
And Shannon, 2x4s are really easy to reuse. I mean, they're sticks basically, right? We can use them in lots of different ways. But what about some of these materials that might be a little harder when you're extracting them in the deconstruction process and they're not so readily apparently reusable? And an example might be gypsum board, or maybe even concrete. What do you do with those?
Well,
What do you do with those?
concrete's sort of an easy one, and you know, admittedly, it's a little bit more of a recycling. It is technically reused, I guess you could say, but you know, an obvious example would be using this as underlayment. You can actually reuse concrete, grind it up on your own project site. So I will also say, when you come to visit Lifecycle Building Center, all of the gravel you see in the parking lot is literally reconstituted building materials. So you literally see pieces of concrete block, concrete, brick, little pieces of Totten toilets, all mixed together. But if you don't mind, I'd actually like to highlight an example that we had a little bit of an indirect connection to at the Canida building. So I believe it was the alumni building that had the slate roof. So I want to make sure I have that right. I don't think it was Tech Tower. I think it was the Georgia Tech alumni building. And so we basically helped the contractor develop some containers and kind of talk through the process of reclaiming all of the slate tile roofing. And then I'm assuming, Lord Ex-Sergeant, I don't know if Alyssa's still here, but I'm assuming that project team basically came up with the idea of incorporating all of the slate into the wet walls within the bathrooms throughout the project. So there's a lot of stories like that, but taking something, to your point, that wasn't originally intended to be wall tile, and then having that story in your space to be able to change people's minds, and honestly, for me, being able to change behavior. So we showed that shot of the pilot at City Hall. That's what this is about. This is about really understanding all of the cascading benefits of material recovery and reuse. It's not just about keeping things out of landfill. It's not just about saving money. It really is about changing how people think, changing the decisions that we make when we have the power and ability. If a building is coming down in our community, there's so much opportunity that can come from that. So I'll stop there.
Thanks. And there was a question about tours, and I know that the Canida building will have public tours. I believe if you Google Canida building tour, it should get you to that site. Southface has many of these regenerative qualities in our buildings, and we have public tours every Wednesday. Beltline barn, you can go visit it anytime. It's on the Beltline. It might not be open, but there's an active garden there, so during gardening season, there's probably somebody there. Lifecycle Building Center has tours. They can contact you if they're interested.
We actually have a tour during Greenville. We were just talking about that earlier. I think it's November 18th. Is that right? It's a Monday. Nancy can tell you all about it, Nancy Larson.
That's right, and yeah, several of these sites are going to be included in our Greenville tours this year, so check it out on the
Great, so you
Greenville
can
Expo site.
Google Greenville Atlanta tours, and that should take you to the tour page of the Greenville Expo, which is the largest green building design, construction, and maintenance conference in existence.
Additionally, our December SART will be at the Canida building. We will be on site to talk about water issues. So if you're interested in seeing it, please wait to get our link.
Okay, and we're almost out of time, so I'm gonna wrap it up with this question. And I think each of you probably have a brief response to this one. What is the biggest enemy of regenerative economies and regenerative design, and how do we fight them?
Change is difficult for most people, and it's really moving past, the way that we've been thinking about buildings, before, from my lifetime and much longer, and really thinking about them just in a completely different context. So it's really it's a mind shift. It's a change management process.
I think for us, probably, it would be cost. These projects do cost a little bit more. Can be built notwithstanding, they probably say, I couldn't even put a number under the money that they say, well, what a 100-year-old yellow pine joist is worth these days, but cost anywhere from $10, $12, $15 a linear foot for smaller boards. They probably say $150,000 in material costs. But on an average project, moving to higher standards of LEED like the FSC, it costs more. I mean, there's more costs in tracking it. There's costs in material costs, 10 to 20% more, and it's not always easily sourced. It's getting easier, but that's really the downside. But when you got more money, take a plan.
Well, I would sort of like to marry those two comments a little bit. I feel like part of the challenge now is that the new ways of thinking and the new processes just haven't been normalized yet. We're still on the beginning of this frontier, but this can happen. So I couldn't agree more with what Stanton was saying. Getting folks to be willing to go through a different process, a different thought process, a different planning process, a different collaboration process from the very beginning of the project is key. But the irony is, and I'm sorry, I'm going to do it again, I'm going to plug another Candida story, is that, Jimmy Mitchell, one of our board members, was instrumental in ensuring that all these salvage materials got incorporated and thought about during the design process. And they put out something like 13 bids to get the nail laminated timber decking panels constructed. And they only got one bid, and it was really high. And so Jimmy personally assembled a self-performed team. He hired folks from Georgia Works and had 6 guys for 4 months in a warehouse at Georgia Tech, and they built those 489 panels for half the cost. So again, these things can be done, but it takes the motivation to innovate. And yes, so one of those 6 men from Georgia Works was eventually hired in construction. I think he's at Evergreen Construction, and he's still there.
Yeah, I think to echo the opportunity we have with that's the way we've always done it mentality and shifting that conversation. So just to reiterate what's already been talked about, I think another opportunity with it is really making this conversation very human. So it can get very scientific very quickly. We need to lead with the research and the science, absolutely. But translate it into a language that's easily understandable by everybody that we're talking to and meeting that person where they are in that journey. Maybe we're ready for a Living Building Challenge project. Maybe we're ready to just talk about recycled content in our products, right? So meeting people where they are and making that a very human conversation.
Great. So I teased you. This is really the last question. Can you each tell me one thing I, as a person out there on the street, can do to move my life towards a regenerative economy or regenerative design perspective? No, you gotta answer.
I know we all answer that. That's a great question. I think it's really, for me, it's making sure that we're practicing what we preach in our day-to-day lives. So for me, I drive a lot. I'm at client meetings all the time. Is there an opportunity where I could look at more sustainable transportation, for example? Is a more tangible way with it, as well as continuing the conversation with what I'm doing professionally with that human lens of the conversation.
Unsurprisingly, I have a little bit of a bent toward material issues. So, anybody can participate in the process that organizations like ours are doing in the community. And, what that means, again, is really just thinking about alternatives. So if you become aware within your own home, within your office, any buildings that are being removed, being renovated, and then on the other side, design. So, I used to practice architecture. I think that there's so much power in thinking about how you can incorporate reclaimed materials, And even going beyond that, the design community has an opportunity to also look at how building material products are designed themselves to make things easier to take components apart. So that's what I think about a lot.
I think as far as I go, or people that are like me, I mean, at that level is, you know, start going energy efficient as much as you can. And I think that's the key that's closest to the masses as far as everybody's concerned out there. You know, use LED bulbs, turn lights off. I mean, I have 2 kids at the house and I turn off 20 light switches a day. I don't know. I walk in the house and it's like, I'm a master of darkness. Turn off. Take time. You know, so just trying to minimize. Close the door to downstairs so that the air conditioning doesn't go down there and outside. I mean, it seems simple, but it's a good place to start. Plus, I'm a scavenger too. I think that you are. So, I take things. My deck that I just built was upcycled from another project that we did. And it was exactly enough to rebuild my deck. So, it's done. It's recycled material fiber on top, and it's like it worked out for me. It worked out for landfill, everything. Scavenger use.
Seek greater interaction with natural systems. Go outside, experience nature, and try to really think about how nature works and bring that back inside. Or just stay outside.
All right, thank you very much for coming. Let's give us a nice round. All right, stay tuned for more conversations around the regenerative economy we're excited about.
Also, guys, one more event plug. We are hosting here at Southface another Clean Cities event next week. Actually, both co-directors are at work. They work at Southface, so we'll have the information up at the registration desk if anybody's interested in coming. Guys, feel free if you're still.
Nice meeting to see you too. Yeah.
Oh no.
It was fun last night. I'm glad, yeah, just, you were over there. You were
There was something.
yeah, I already planned to do that, so I couldn't, yeah. And then when I saw it at 8:30, I was like, yeah. This is good. I like what he said. Learn more about natural systems and do it. All right. You too.
Yeah, so your challenge is translating that Yeah, there's a value.
Been making a poll.